Hello guys, so I just want to kick off. I'm Sarah. I started this user group back in February because I didn't have anything for me to attend to help kind of learn about Azure. So this is why we're all here tonight, and I thank you guys for your support. It's a great turnout. I appreciate all the support. So tonight we're just going to have a talk. There's two talks actually. Dave's going to kick off with a kind of foundation, and then we're going to break for some pizza and some beer, and then Christos is going to do a kind of serverless talk afterwards. And then it'll just be kind of networking and get to know each other and share business cards, etc. like that. So Tom's also involved in organising the user group.
Yeah. So I'm Tom Cox. So you probably already know me. It's been that long. I say it's been that long. So yeah, who is our obviously we work together commercially, and we kind of want to get this off personally.
Yeah.
It's gone from like under 10 people. Under 10 would be the marketing term. Under 10 people in a Starbucks to that's pretty cool. Hopefully going to grow it a lot bigger and see what happens. It's a wide topic, so I expect hundreds of these.
So yeah, it's amazing what pizza and beer can do.
I was just about to say that. It's a pretty chill event. Don't worry about it. I mean, this is how I dress anyway, so don't worry about it. But if we didn't have pizza and beer, what would we be doing? It's like we're pitching a startup or something. So anyway, no. So it's pretty chill out. We've got the two talks, so just enjoy it. And any feedback, just come and see us. Cool.
So I got it.
Okay.
Yeah, cool.
Well, evening everybody. So my name's Dave Samuelson. I'm one of the cloud at Microsoft, and my colleague here is also with us. Would you want to do a quick introduction?
Yeah, I'm cloud solution architect with Microsoft. Been with them for about a year on the Azure team. Prior to that, contracting more or less financial services around Edinburgh for the last 12, 15 years.
So our role as cloud solutions architects is to go into organisations and try and help them on their journey to Azure. So that's really where we come in. We help organisations. I'm specifically aligned to financial services. Been there for 2 years as well, all doing sort of Azure work. So tonight's session is Azure fundamentals in 45 minutes. How can I do that? It was quite a difficult one. So this is really going to be quite a high level session. Can I maybe get a show of hands from everybody who's been using Azure? Okay, so that could be a problem. Then we're doing something really high level here, but we'll run it. We've only got 45 minutes, so we'll see how it goes. I have some slides, and we can jump into some demos. The demos were fairly basic, fundamental. I do have, sort of try and make it a little bit interactive, so we've got a wee demo at the end that I've been capturing over the last couple of days, some tweets. But I would encourage you maybe to start tweeting during the session, Glasgow Azure user group or GAUG, and I can show you some of the stuff that takes place with some of our platform as a service. So, without further ado, we'll go run through these and we'll see how this works. It's a little bit tight, we've had some problems trying to get connected, but bear with us. So, really before we start, we're looking at Azure and you're thinking, okay, why do you need Azure? What's the cloud? Why do people need it? So it's all about digital disruption. Okay, if we look at organisations in the Fortune 500, okay, since 2000, 50% of those companies no longer exist, all due to digital disruption. Look at Uber. Who would have thought Uber transforming the taxi business the way it has? So what we're seeing is organisations changing, and what they're looking to do is transform digitally. And what we're seeing, the key out of that is 4 strategies that they tend to adopt: engaging customers, transforming products, optimising operations, and most importantly, empowering employees. Now what you're getting from that is agility, and that's where cloud comes in. Okay, how many people in here struggle from getting VMs provisioned, having to wait for weeks and weeks on end to get a VM? Go to the cloud now and you can get a VM in 5 minutes. Strangely enough, we now get feedback on that 5 minutes is too slow. So we've got Azure container instances. But so why is it really important then? So if you look at in terms of devices and technology, okay, we're looking at 1 million devices coming online per hour by 2020. That's what we're expecting. So technology is absolutely everywhere. Okay, Standard & Poor's as well. By 2020, they're saying organisations will only be 12 years old, an average of 12 years old. Now, if you go back to something like 1960, organisations were 60 years old. So you've seen this birth of new companies coming through, and they're picking up Agile, and they're running with cloud technology, so it's all new starters. And another sort of key, these are some of the stats we've got, 60% of computing will be in the public cloud by 2025. So if you look at Azure, what is Azure? This is Microsoft's global scale cloud platform, okay? It's an intelligent cloud. We've got lots of machine learning looking at all the traffic coming in and out of Azure. It's a hybrid platform, so we're offering now hybrid capabilities, hybrid management, hybrid provisioning through Azure Stack. Productivity, so this is all again back to agility. How quickly can you provision resources in the cloud? How can your developers move and transform your business? And most importantly of all, it's trusted, okay? We all know that data privacy and security is key here, okay? Azure covers this. We've got the most sort of compliance certifications in terms of the whole cloud platforms. A really basic slide, this one, okay, but the idea is just fundamental to get, I don't know how familiar everybody is with the service delivery models, IaaS, PaaS and SaaS. On the far left hand side here then we have everything in blue is on premises, okay? So right the way up from network, servers, virtualization, right the way up to your applications, you have to manage that just now. And that's the world that we've traditionally been living in. Moving into infrastructure as a service then, what you tend to then have is you delegate the responsibility. So by delegating the responsibility of some of these pieces, you no longer have to have the management overheads, the costs associated with managing those blocks. And the further to the right you move, the actual more efficient you'll become. But you have to balance that with flexibility, okay? On the far left, you have complete control on premises, infrastructure as a service, okay? You'll have control over the OS, but you don't have control over the tin and the hosts. And then in platform as a service, what you're looking at is only being responsible for applications and data. SaaS is obviously from a Microsoft perspective where Office 365 and solutions like that fit in. From my own experience, I've seen people moving to the cloud, and if you look at Azure, Azure traditionally covers the infrastructure and the platform as a service components. And if we look to the left hand side here, IaaS is traditionally used for lift and shift. So if you just want to get to the cloud quickly, you can take your resources and you can take them and you can move them to Azure. We have solutions that allow you to do that really, really easily, okay? So in terms of a backup and Azure site recovery, you can actually take machines and use Azure as a DR scenario, okay? So you don't have to, you can have on-premises machines running and take that to back them up to the cloud, and then you can run DR and switch over to Azure and use it. So people use it for DR, but they also use it for migration.
It's also maybe worth saying as well from an IaaS point of view, so it's not just lift and shift. The other thing that we will see a lot is that people are most comfortable if they're coming from on-premise up into the cloud. The first time, 90% of the time are going to be admins because they know that these are servers and it's the same server after 10 years, just up in the cloud type things. Yeah.
So that's traditionally what we see, but from my own experience, I now see organisations moving more and more towards PaaS. And Christos is here with some of the PaaS platforms and serverless, which is the nice jazzy stuff to talk about. In terms of hyperscale for Azure, this is really, really important because in terms of cloud providers, Microsoft's got massive coverage, okay? We've got 42 announced cloud regions. Just 2 weeks ago we announced 2 regions in Australia, okay? So there's only 34 of these online, 8 of them are still coming, but if you look at it, it's one of the second largest network in the world it's being quoted as just now. So it's phenomenal, the coverage that we actually have, okay? To give you a little view of what one of these regions will look like, there's a small video here, but just take a look at this. video just to show you the absolute scale of some of these data centres that we actually run. We
it's
do.
worth mentioning as well. Sorry, whenever you go back to that map, and it shows all those regions across the world, and you're sort of thinking like the speed of the network between those is going to obviously be affected. But there's a really good video on Build that they talked about how the fact that we're using FPGAs in front of the network cards. So instead of having in traditional sort of virtual environments, most of the networking stack was in software, whereas now they're bringing more and more out into hardware using the FPGAs and then using that to be able to get massively across these. So even though if you've got resources in West US and maybe resources in Europe, the speed between those is, you know, it's awesome what they can do. It's definitely worth it. If you find that video on Build, it's definitely worth watching.
I mean, in terms of the coverage here as well, the regions are paired. So you have, for example, North and West Europe, which is meant for data regulatory rules. Okay, data doesn't leave that region, so you can fail over between those two regions. We've brought a UK region online, so for organisations who really need their data to be resident in the UK, there's a UK region available as well. So that's the way that we work in terms of Azure, where these data centres are typically more than 300 miles apart, and that's the sort of distance that we cover for DR, so something, a major storm or something like that came in. That's the type of thing that these actually cover you for. There are some changes coming around that, but we can talk about some of that as part of the networking.
Does that mean we're getting a Scottish data centre? There's a giant empty data centre in the M8, if you may have heard it.
Maybe we should take that forward as feedback then.
Amazon may or may not be also interested. So.
All right, okay. Well, we should get a hold of that.
Can I ask a question about the network? So if you've got if you're on an Azure zone one side of the world and you want to have a social Azure zone on the other side, do you ever break off the backbone into the public internet?
Not
Stays internal with Microsoft.
No.
So,
But customers can pay for advanced networking solutions like ExpressRoute, which gives them a dedicated connection into a port, and then everything goes over the Azure
but
backbone.
if it's Azure zone to Azure zone,
It's,
it will completely traverse your backbone, whatever, even if it's a public IP that's referenced on it.
Yeah.
if it's Azure services,
Yes, Azure service.
Azure service to Azure service, then it goes over the Azure backbone.
Right. Thank you.
So probably a very quick point on ExpressRoute. So if you have ExpressRoute and the standard ExpressRoute you haven't gone in terminating in Europe, for example, then any of your customer sites access across that ExpressRoute in Europe will go across that and stay inside the Microsoft network. If then that customer site wants to go to the US, it doesn't go through ExpressRoute, it'll actually go over your whatever VPN, whatever you have put into there. If you go for the ExpressRoute Premium, then it gives you global coverage. So it always goes out ExpressRoute, so it goes into the Microsoft network and then from there it goes.
Okay. Slide then is really just to emphasise, and this is really key because I think people think of Microsoft of old and Microsoft Azure, and they think it's all Windows. Okay, it's not. Okay, I can tell you we've launched features recently in Azure Cloud Shell. It's been launched in before it's launched in PowerShell. So things have changed. Okay, this is an open and flexible cloud. Okay, so we support. There's Linux, we've even got Red Hat support, which is something that we needed for enterprises. So that is a really quite a unique relationship because we actually have Red Hat people embedded within our support teams. Okay, so it doesn't go to someone and then handed off to Red Hat, it is those Red Hat guys there. And in terms of application frameworks and DevOps, we support all the agile tooling. We've got Visual Studio, we integrate with Jenkins, Ansible, Puppet, shit. So I'm not going to cover all that detail in the slides. I'm sure you're familiar with those types of tooling and CI and CD tools as well as the app frameworks. In terms of trust then, we do have an Azure Trust Centre, so we've got a dedicated site that if you've got questions and you need to understand, for example, data residency, where services are being run, we've got a dedicated portal called the Azure Trust Centre that exposes all of that information. Now, this here is basically just calling out that we have more certifications than any other cloud provider. Okay, so Azure is the most trusted cloud out there. In terms of explaining a little bit more again, just about the IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS. I know some people don't like this, but this is quite a technical slide, and it's simplified down a little bit from the Azure services, but it does really explain how IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS work together. So in the bottom layer here, infrastructure as a service, is built on our data center premises, and it consists of the 3 main services: OS, storage, and networking. So compute, storage, and networking. From a compute perspective, we've got a vast range of virtual machines that are available. Okay, so from small everyday workloads right up to high threshold for SAP HANA workloads. So we've got lots and lots of variations there. We're introducing container services. We've introduced Azure container instances recently. Storage, predominantly of blob files, and with that, blobs and storage, we actually replicate the storage 3 times in a data center. Okay, that's the lowest level that we can have in terms of locally redundant storage. You can move up to geo-redundant storage, which means that we will take 3 copies in one data center, and we will do an asynchronous commit of that data to another region. Okay, so you get all of that as part of that storage costs. The 3 copies in the one data center are synchronous, and the additional for the geo-replication is asynchronous. Networking is all then based on our software-defined network. Okay, and we've got some really, in terms of the network throughput, there's changes happening in this all the time. Azure is an expanding platform. If I could just go back to the OS one as well, from an Azure perspective, we are the only cloud provider to offer nested virtualization. Okay, that's something that we've just announced. We're running machines in DV3 and EV3 series, were the ones that we've just launched. And we're bringing nested virtualization to the rest of the fleet. Okay, and if you think about, I tend to think of this like the Russian dolls. You know, you've got a machine running Hyper-V and then another machine inside it and another machine inside it. So this is quite unique in terms of the whole cloud.
Can you nest with other hypervisors?
At this moment it's Hyper-V, I think. We can double check that, I think it's only Hyper-V.
Excuse me, so I've been asked if I want to migrate Office 365 services from EU data centers into the UK data centers. Is there technical considerations that we should know about that, or is there further information that we were to get?
I think we could pick up on that separately. I don't specifically deal in the Office 365 piece, but there may be some. We can certainly put you in touch with the
If you want to ask about that when we pop out,
pick up on that.
Can I ask a question as well, sorry, around the storage piece? So you mentioned about geo-storage pushing data from a data center in one region to a data center in another region. Presumably, what are the options in terms of just simply replicating within the same region? And IaaS, is that where you would need to spin up another server in the other?
Whenever we talk about it, running a data center is a region, so a region will have multiple data centers in it, right? So if we talk about the zone redundant storage, then replicate 3 times within West Europe, for example, and replicate 3 times within North Europe, so it keeps inside that region. Whenever it's geo redundant, then it moves from, for example, West Europe and North Europe region out into the US region or something.
Perfect, that's how I guess you do have data center redundancy, not as a phones if you need it. No.
It's probably worth noting as well, just on that redundancy, you can as a customer come in and say, I want my data from the other copy. So that redundancy there from Microsoft redundancy. So whenever we invoke DR, we can take that in, as opposed to you relying on for your DR.
So if you think about that as IaaS, that's the base platform. That's the base, the foundations that everything's built upon. And then we start to bring in some of the PaaS services and encapsulate some of the hybrid sort of management and security capabilities. So this is really simplified. This is not meant to be a holistic picture of all the Azure services. I don't think we could get it in one slide. But it's really just to show you the sort of levels of services that we've actually got available. So up in the top there, we've got microservices with Service Fabric, if you're familiar with. That's decomposing monolithic applications. Service Fabric is one option. We've got Azure Batch. Remote apps shouldn't really be there now, so that's yeah. So we should take that off. Web and mobile, we use what we call our Azure Application Service, which is where you have the ability to stand up web applications very, very quickly. I think typically you can set up a web application and it'll deploy in a couple of minutes. So you'll have an IIS box effectively sitting ready for you to deploy your web application code to. Okay. Developer services, so we're talking about tooling. We use Visual Studio. We've got Visual Studio Team Services, the online offering. Does anybody use that? Good. I think it's a really, really slick service, and with across the piece, the integration with Visual Studio now and all the other tools, I think it's phenomenal. Visual Studio Code as well as a free offering, so nice editor. Moving into data space, we've got SQL, so we offer Azure SQL DB, which is a PaaS offering of a SQL service. Cosmos DB should be up there as well now. And coming into analytics, we offer things like machine learning and stream analytics, event hubs, Azure Data Factory, which is an orchestration pipeline for data moving from on-premises up into Azure. I think we should probably, what am I for time? We should probably jump into just do a couple of demos in the portal, get you a wee bit. I feel like I should lose some weight. Thanks.
So is there any other questions on stuff that covers?
It's very high level. Apologies if some of you guys put your hands up earlier on.
Is there any plan for the classic cloud services to move to ARM?
It is on the roadmap. I have seen it on the roadmap, but I don't have any confirmed dates on that. We can get these. I think maybe as part of the networking session, we should pick up some of these questions because it's the last to see those customers asking about cloud services, and it's not going away. We still run a lot of services on cloud services behind the scenes.
And obviously, on the energy cloud services, you can't create cloud services anymore within ASM. You have to do it all through onboarding, right? So all the UI stuff is moved over into onboarding. Any questions?
I've got the boring question, sorry. You're talking about certifications, etc., FedRAMP and blah blah blah, but half the battle of these, like Protected B for Canada, is you have to be invited. Right. So although you're offering it, how do we take advantage of that? Or are you saying that we would have a scheme with you, for example, would automatically invite into that zone?
So that trust centre is
Public.
yeah, so whenever they're talking about that, they're saying that's the Azure infrastructure, Azure data centers and regions, all meet those certifications.
Right.
So if you were creating an application on those, then you can say, well, my infrastructure meets all those because I'm sitting on Azure, but then potentially maybe your application would still have to run through that certification as well.
Okay.
You know,
There's a
does that make
challenge
sense?
to go into these areas with the straight away chuck these blockers in your way, talking about, you must have this certification, whether you got it, that's half the battle.
Yeah.
In theory.
So just walk through the portal and that gives people some idea. But yeah, this is a website that's been put together by one of the colleagues in Microsoft, and it's quite, I think it's quite good. It actually shows a lot of the services and it's maintained, and it's a useful link to have because as soon as you click on some of the straight to documentation and pricing, but it gives you like a single go-to place to actually see about some of the Azure services. What I would suggest, however, is Azure.com should be your friend. That should be your first go-to place. If you're looking for anything about Azure, go to Azure.com.
You can use these slides available afterwards.
Yeah, you can make this available. There's some more material in this as well. I've got some stuff that I'm not covering, so we'll give you some links to resources as well.
Worth mentioning as well on Azure.com and within Docs as well, so it's not just documentation. There's loads and loads of tutorials in there how to get started in this stuff. So if you want to find out about something, say service fact or service bus or something like that, then you go in, do all the documentation, read up on it, but there's the how to get started, quick starts on them, and those are really up to date as well. They're kept really up to date too.
Yeah, I mean, we'll cover some of it later, I think. Yeah. I mean, if you come into the resources, there's also white papers and case studies. So if you're looking for customers that have moved to the cloud or moved to Azure using a particular service, you can come in here and search on that and search in your own specific industry vertical as well. So there's lots in here, and as Adrian's mentioning, in terms of demos, you can get access to all the SDKs. So in terms of what we have here, it's cover.
Worth mentioning on that last slide as well was the Azure roadmap. So we recently made the Azure roadmap public as well. So it's on there. And you'll find as well that a lot of the teams, that Azure roadmap there is the sort of global. From the Azure point of view, a lot of the teams have their own. So like the API management team, for example, have got a travel board that that they actively work off for getting their own roadmap as possible.
So, how deep has everybody went in the portal before I go through talking about the portal, how it's all composed? Is people happy with that, or is that a level that's too...
Happy with the portal?
Well, I mean, are you how familiar with the portal are you? How familiar? Right, okay. I'll try and skim over some of it then, but I'm sure there's still some people that are interested. So in terms of the portal, you've got this ability that you can create dashboards. And the dashboards is effectively this workspace here where you can pin tiles to it. Okay, so you can very much customize this, and in this case here, I created one called the Glasgow Azure user group just so I could capture some of the resources that spin up here. Search is really useful across the top just for people who haven't been navigating the portal. When you start to have lots of resources, then it's really important to be able to find them, and this is really a quick way of doing that. This portal is now based pretty much on, well, it's user-centric. If you're familiar with the old portal, it was all based around subscription, but this is based around your user permissions. So I've actually logged in using my Microsoft account, and if you're not familiar, this is a subscription that contains all these Azure resources. My account exists in something called an Azure Active Directory instance. Okay? That Azure Active Directory instance has a trust with the subscription. Okay? And the reason it has that trust is because I can now assign role-based access permissions to the resources inside Azure, backed by that Azure Active Directory instance. It's important that, just to call out, the Azure Active Directory instance has a separate lifecycle from a subscription. Okay? You can have an Azure Active Directory instance, but have no subscriptions. Okay? So you can basically relink them to different subscriptions. It's just important to realise that.
Can you use that interchangeably with the word tenant?
Yes.
Yeah,
That's this is where it gets confusing for people. So it's just to give that example. So if I click on here, you'll see. Hopefully I'm not exposing too much here, but I have access to a number of my customers' tenants that I can run and do work for them. Okay. Up here is what I mentioned earlier on about Cloud Share. If you navigate this. Now what you're looking at is the portal. This is just a UI. All the interaction behind the scenes is taking place over the REST APIs. Okay, so they offer PowerShell. There's an Azure command line cross-platform command line interface that you can use, and all those tools are available from our Azure resources. I can run it interactively inside the cloud here using Bash. PowerShell coming soon. Or I mean, I could in the same way I could spin up a. I can't type today. You can choose to run PowerShell, and I think I've got the command line platform installed there. So just AZ will give you the help. He says. And in the same way, I can do that actually inside the portal. And the important thing here is in the portal, it's already got my credentials. So when I was doing it outside, I had to manage, you have to go in and log in PowerShell. In here, you don't have to do that because you're already logged in. So it's a nice, easy way to manage resources inside here. So if I was to do AZ VM list, this will actually look at the virtual machines that I have inside the subscription and list out all the resources. Now if I was to make that bigger.
Is that quite new? PowerShell from where?
Yep.
Yeah, like 3 months.
Yeah.
3 months.
But it's really powerful.
Yeah.
So
one of the things I've done up to that yet, but it's certainly on the way. So, you know, the way you've got the concept of resource groups, and then inside the resource groups, you've got VMs and things like that. So within the shell, you're going to have an option where you can go like CD space resource group, and it opens up a resource group, and you can like do a dir on the resource group, and all this stuff, all it's live. It's quite cool. So whenever you're used to that sort of file structure, it follows it, which is really, really useful.
if I'm right, there's also an AZ interactive here, and it gives you hints and tips, so basically your intelligence. So I'll close that just now, just as an example. So all these tiles, so what we're going to do is a basic sort of IaaS example, so I'm not going to not bore people too much. If we're going here through new, we can choose the compute resources, and we can navigate, we can choose the type of resource that you want to spin up in terms of compute. So a really simple one here is Windows Server 2016.
Have to go and figure it myself. You do have to do a lot. There's a lot of integration into user as well.
Yeah, I mean, remember this is almost, it's an IaaS world, you have to manage it. Those are the elements that you have to manage. So that's the trade-off. If you want that, you're going to have to manage it.
So even those, the Citrix example you showed there, that's still IaaS?
Yeah, so
You haven't yet,
so
you're not
that's,
in PaaS yet?
no,
Right,
you
so
have
you still have to specify the machine, etc., but what you've got is basically a template there that doesn't just spin up a Windows host, it spins up a Windows host with Citrix application software, etc.
They run all the custom extensions and custom scripts on it to build and Citrix on it.
Yeah, some of them are bring your own license, but I think we've just recently launched a pay-as-you-go offering as well, so you can actually pay for the next scale of license as you go along as well. So.
Web apps, I was going to do a demo with web app and SQL. We're kind of running short of time, I'll just make sure we don't run too far over. But there's the web app and SQL. Basically, I'll just run you through the prompts again to give you a web app and a SQL instance already deployed. I have one running here inside these resource groups. So just as an example, I'll pick one up. This is SQL DB, so we can provision this in a couple of minutes. Okay, a web app and a SQL instance that can be available for you to use, for developers to use locally, or for you to start to run enterprise software on. The key thing is that you can choose the regions you want to run it in. I've chosen this case to deploy resources to West Europe, but with SQL DB as a PaaS offering, you no longer have to worry about always on and managing multiple machines and program, because what you've got here is a PaaS offering, and we make this highly available for you.
So any plans to add open source technologies like MySQL, Mongo, or whatever?
MySQL's already there.
Well, it's PaaS.
Yes.
Already.
MySQL's already there. Mongo's there as part of a driver for Cosmos DB.
So you typically interact with that or access it? Is that through a VPN or would you have an external interface?
So the way that these endpoints are deployed just now is in terms of PaaS for storage, like SQL and storage endpoints, they are public IPs effectively, but that doesn't really say that they're accessible from the public.
Yeah.
We provide methods over and above storage for SaaS signatures and policies to restrict access. And in terms of the SQL instance, if I was to open up this SQL instance, you do actually have a firewall there where you can actually go in and change the rules. So you can restrict this firewall to be only, or the SQL instance to be only accessible from a specific range. Yeah, that's, so there may be changes in the future. People, because they've certainly seen feedback that people want those instances to be inside a virtual network, so where you can bring your own private address space and things like that. But that's all on roadmap items, so I think if you look on user voice, people are asking for those types of features.
Yeah.
In terms of the blades, I think what we'll do is geo-replication. Just an example that from a SQL DB perspective that you can choose to replicate in any region that you want. Okay, so you can actually just choose one of these regions. If I said I'm already running in the primary region is here in East US, and the secondary region is set up as West Europe, just an example. I can choose to set up any other replication, a number of, is it 4 copies I think you can do, so you can replicate 4 times. But if I choose to go up to SQL Server instance, I can choose to fail over between these, so I can switch the primary and secondary as part of a failover group.
You notice as well the status on that secondary, they're readable, so you can potentially have in that sort of scenario where most of your users are here in the US and access the primary database, so any writes go to that primary one, but if you've got users over in Europe as well and they're just reading, so as long as your application is capable and read aware, then they can read directly from that as well. So you can have like a web apps in both places and traffic managed across the bottom, and then depending on the web app, the Europe web app will actually hit the readable one in SQL database, or in the same way as you do with always on readable groups in SQL.
So the front-end portal handle that, does the code have to do the application?
Or application does that. So it's the connection string. So whenever you put in the connection string, then there's I can't remember
There's a DNSC name you can use as well as part of it. So if you just change it, you put your DNSC name in, that'll. I'm conscious we're 7 o'clock, so I'll just quickly we'll wrap up. I'll just show you something that I knocked up together just in a couple of minutes yesterday or the day before, just to try and show you the power of PaaS, and I think it's probably a good segue into Chris Dossie's work. We do something called logic apps. Logic app are event-driven workflow applications, and what I did is I picked something up from Twitter. So I'll show you this just now, just very quickly, and you can see sort of the power that I've done this in. There's absolutely no code whatsoever in this, okay? So even I can pick it up and do it. but there's no code in this, right? But essentially, we've got a whole number of out-of-the-box connectors and actions that can be taken. And what I just really wanted to show you is that the event-driven, or the event that triggers this workflow is a tweet. So I've actually put in a connection to Twitter, and I've done a search on these terms here. Glasgow Azure user group. So just random terms, just to sort of try and see what was getting posted before this event. I've then taken that and I've run it through Azure's cognitive services. Okay, so we have a whole range of cognitive services for speech to text, analytics, sentiment analysis. So there's lots of things here. So I've taken this, and in the sentiment, I've passed in the tweet text. The good thing about this is, if you look at it, this is a drag and drop. It's a visual interface. I've got all the data that's available from Twitter here, and I can just add it in there. Right? There's no code whatsoever. Okay.
So you're saying this for your citizen developers. So in your organisation, you have developers who understand code and can do code. Citizen developers who try to do that code, and this just gives them an easier way to do it, but also you have control easy to do it.
So I think at a top level, you can get the dev to do their own API essentially, or something like Twitter. Twitter is common, but something that's custom.
Yeah,
you can make your own. So the top level will still use that too.
Yeah.
We've got lots of them in there. So just quickly, I'll say I've taken that sentiment. I've then done a condition on that says if it's negative or positive, and in this case, so the condition is if it's below 0.5, which is the average, so it's marked out 1, then I was just sending myself an email in this window here. Yeah. So I was basically sending an email. And the other one, what I was doing was I was taking the tweet text and I was then running text analytics against it to work out the keywords. The keywords was so that I can push that into a word cloud and basically just give you a visualization. So what I've done here is I've pushed this out to Power BI. So I've created it and I'm basically passing the values out straight out to Power BI. So I'll now show you what I did in Power BI. This was literally, honestly, 5 minutes to do that, and this little piece here. So I've got a number of tweets now. None of them are accurate, and probably some of them might be a bit dangerous. But the idea here is this is the word cloud that's extracted the keywords from people's tweets. If I click on the words, look, all these charts change, and so this is all interactive. So anything that Glasgow Azure UG in it is sitting down here, and this is just raw data put out. So created on a particular date, and I've got some of the whoever's tweeted these things. So Sideshow, Sideshow Tov. Is that you? Cool. So it can do all that. So I've really just trying to capture that, and I was looking at the sentiment that was going on just over the piece. So anything above 0.5 was positive, and anything below was negative, and that's just a little trend line for that period of time there. So this was just really quickly, but it was just to show you the real power of PaaS. That's connectors inside a logic app that have absolutely zero code, drag and drop, and you can get up and running in minutes with that stuff.
So we had one of my customers recently, they had a team of people who went into Salesforce Chatter, and they picked out the sentiment within Salesforce Chatter based by reading it, and then they did competitor analysis. So we went in and showed them this and had it set up in a demo within 5 minutes. But when our DSAs, the guys were just sitting there going, why are we not doing this? Because it's that easy.
The amount of people I've shown that demo to now, and they're all doing exactly that. They're going on to Twitter and Facebook just to check on their own company name, see what's happening. That's That's how easy it is. They can get that and they can take it, they could tweet it, they could send it to Facebook, send it to LinkedIn, you could it's basically an integration with any other systems. There's lots and lots of connectors that are already there.
I think the CRM is like the biggest thing that people are using it for. Like, so if a user is created, send welcome pack, send an email to marketing, do this, you know, like that sort of stuff. Is that what it's aimed at? Or like,
yeah, well, you can do it for any of that, so you can take it as event based.
Yeah.
So it's the same as functions and that Christos will cover. But with that event based, it could be adding a record to a SQL table. That's what the trigger is, and then you can go and, but you can do that really quickly. So I'll wrap up for you guys. You've probably already been doing this, but in terms of getting started with Azure, you know, you can get $200 of free credit for 30 days, just to be used within that 30 days, or you can sign up for Dev Essentials and you'll get $25 free every month for a year. Okay, so those are types of ways that you can get into Azure and really sort of kick the tires on some of those services if your organisation's not got an enterprise agreement.
is that quite the pricing different from the Action Pack?
Action Pack.
It's like, I get credits from Action Pack,
right.
so Microsoft Action Pack.
Okay.
So it's a yearly subscription.
Right.
I don't know if you need to be a partner to do that. I don't know if that's a common, but I've got that, and it gives me £75 per month in Azure credits.
Yeah.
And basically any operating system and Microsoft that I want to download for internal use. Great.
Yeah. Some of the links, pricing, it's really important people don't realise, but we've got a really quite detailed pricing calculator now on that portal. You can export it to Excel, so if you want to basically run up an estimate, save it, export it, you can then post that around your organisation. We've also got the total cost of ownership calculator for any on-premises software, so if you're looking to do a real comparison, taking into account cooling, electricity, all that sort of stuff, then we give you that. And the last thing for me is, this is a joint event, and we are actually going to be starting up in Edinburgh Azure user group as well. I know most people from here are probably Glasgow, but we will be starting up another one in Edinburgh. This is really just the start of it, and I think that this is quite a high level topic. We will hope to really dive into much more detailed topics in future, as well as having some of you guys present as well. So thank you very much for your time, and I hope that was useful. Thanks, mate.
Right, so that was that. Fairly good stuff on here. Food is outside, pizza's outside, beer's outside. It's all really good, so couldn't get it before I take it home yet. But no, that was that. And, that was that, Dave. Good stuff. Nice. So we're going to break for how long, did you say, Sarah?
20 minutes.
20-minute break, and then we'll be right back in.
Oh, right, okay, you look like someone else. Microsoft takes it as well. Code written in your firewalls, I know the extraction and the ones that you computers are going to must have something that's very northern and they say, what, you're using Juniper, you're using Cisco's, record that. That'd be interesting if you can disclose it.
Cool guys, so next session is Crystals, he's serverless within Azure, so I'll hand over to him. Are you guys going?
First. Thank you for coming back. I think the pizza was pretty good. I've got some really exciting stuff to talk about. And in fact, I was away for 2 weeks on holiday, and then halfway through the week, the second week, 10 new things were announced, like .NET Core 2 was out, Visual Studio was out, Event Grid was out, all these new changes on Azure. And then I came back and I had like a ton of work to catch up on. And I thought, if I'm doing the serverless talk, I might as well mention the new things. So some of you have already talked about, you had a play around with the Event Grid. It's not really there yet, but this is just the first iteration of the preview. So that's quite exciting when it comes to the serverless space, and I will explain why. But obviously, I'm not just covering that. I'm covering logic apps, and I'm covering functions, and I'm covering the whole mindset about serverless, because it's not what you use, the specific tool set, but why you should be using it and why it's so exciting, right? So first, a few things about me. Is that? Oh, my battery died. Or my PowerPoint crashed. Oh, there you go. I'll go manual. So I'm an ex-Microsoft MVP. I think I was the shortest-lived MVP. I got my title in January, and then I joined Microsoft in February. So I was like a month and a few days. But that was still good to get a title. I currently work for Microsoft, hence the reason why I'm not an MVP anymore. And I'm a Premier Field Engineer, which means it's a hybrid between being a consultant, an advocate, a trainer, a speaker, and a dev. So I do lots of different exciting stuff, and most of my time is actually speaking in front of people and talking about the stuff that we can do on Azure, or how they can leverage Azure, and sometimes not even Azure, to run their applications, like using .NET Core on their own premises environment. And obviously, I'm a speaker, I'm a blogger, gamer when my time allows me. I think I've tried to play a game once a quarter, justify the reason why I bought my PlayStation, and I had the conversation with my wife about why I should get it. I'm a dad to 2 young daughters, which I hope they will get into IT, and obviously a husband to a great wife that does all the hard work for me to be here in front of you. So if you want to find me, that's my blog post there, and I tweet quite a bit about lots of different things. So if you ever want to reach out with any questions about Azure or .NET or life in general, just hit me up. Can't promise I will answer everything, but so the agenda today is what is serverless, why you should be excited about serverless. We'll do a couple of demos, so I'll try not to kill you with PowerPoint decks, and in fact, I'll try to avoid them as much as I can, but there's some value into the decks. And how serverless works inside Azure. And in fact, with the addition of Event Grid now, we have a lot more things to discuss about. Again, a few more demos, and then finally, serverless patterns, how you can use them, and the roadmap, like things to come within Azure Functions, non-NDA stuff, obviously. So, serverless and serverless. And you'll be surprised, we're talking about finance companies that were very heavy in the data warehousing space, and they would deploy their massive data centers and infrastructure to run things. And one of the exciting stuff that we see them doing is, rather than going through the iterations of the 80s and the 90s and the 2000, 2010, 2017, they would go from their old mindset to a totally new mindset. And when I want to put that as a metaphor, I say it's like taking a 70s car, taking it away from them and giving them a Tesla. This is the analogy for them. And a good example, obviously I'm not going to disclose the customer, but we went in, finance industry, very heavy regulatory and all that, and they wanted to actually consume data from an external provider. And the first thought was obviously the classic data warehousing that would put the data across from FTP, stick them into the databases, and then they will do all this data manipulation. And I was embedded with them, and I said, why do you want to do all that when we can do it in like no time with minimal amount of code, and will save you hundreds of thousands of pounds? So the initial project was about £700,000 for 9 months. We delivered code to production within 3 months, and we did everything with logic apps and functions. They had minimal amount of code to write. They had minimal amount of onboarding to do, and they were so impressed by that because that was a proof of concept. Obviously to production, which I don't know how proof of concept that can be, but we took that as a proof of concept idea, and now they're moving that across to a lot of different teams. So you have the traditional model of data warehousing with all the servers sitting there, and you have to manage all that, to going to no servers whatsoever. And it's not just them. I mean, everyone is jumping on board now. So, and it's not just Microsoft. We have AWS and Google functions. So they all offer this kind of a serverless model. But there are some things within the serverless in Azure that makes it a lot more enticing to developers and DevOps and infrastructure in general. So the traditional model, we had everything on premises. That'll be your servers, your staff, you would be managing there. And then we decided, as we're moving to the cloud, to move to IaaS. And then Dave very well said, most of the customers will go, these are servers and data center, we'll just move them up to the cloud, and we'll be running on the cloud. It will save us tons of money. Which doesn't really work that way when you move to the cloud, because sometimes it can be a little more expensive. But you get other things that you don't have on premises, like the elasticity, the scalability, the shutting down and starting up the servers, the monitoring, the automation that you don't get out of that. But obviously that wasn't enough for everyone. Developers obviously don't want to run VMs. I don't care about a VM. I want somewhere to run my application. So that's where Platform as a Service came out, where you had your web apps and your SQL database running on the cloud. I don't really have to provision anything. I don't have to maintain the database server. I don't have to maintain the disk. All I care about is that my database can expand to whatever size I want to, and pay obviously the appropriate fee. But then again, you can test something for an hour. You can scale up to a G or a massive VM just to test a little bit of functionality, see if that works out, and then take it down again. You only pay for those minutes that you actually allocate that resource. If you imagine doing that on your own premises, you would call Dell and say, can you send me a massive server? They'll be like, yeah, 6 months, absolutely fine. What do you want? You'll spec it out, you'll get back and forth on the quotes, and then it will come back in 6 months, and you have your server, you have to run everything. Now, you can do everything in minutes. In 5 minutes, obviously, a lot of time to wait for it, right? And then we got the new stuff, the serverless stuff. As a developer, I don't really want to even provision an app on the cloud. I want to run a little bit of code and see how that's going to perform. So maybe I want to have some code that sends an email out. Or maybe I want to have some code that runs something in the background. Now, let's take the traditional thing of, I want to run a process that will go into my database, look into my indices, and then send me an email back when there's running out of space, or my indices are out of, they need to be reindexed, or they're fragmented, and so on. So how I would do it, I will write a PowerShell script, I will upload it into a VM, or maybe I will run a bash script or whatever, and run it as a daemon somewhere, and I will have to have a VM to deploy that. Now I don't have to have any of that. In fact, I can just write that piece of code that does the monitoring against my infrastructure and runs on something. I don't really care what it is underneath. So is serverless really like no servers? Well, we do have servers obviously to run your stuff, but you don't even know what it is. So right now, if you want to deploy a Python function, then you have no idea whether that's running on a Linux machine or a Windows machine. And you don't really care about that, right? All you care about is taking your piece of code and running it somewhere. You can automate all these different things that in the past you would need to know exactly what you're deploying on. A Linux machine with a Linux administrator to manage all that, or a Windows machine with a Windows administrator to run permissions and security and everything else. We've eradicated all that for you. So what is really serverless, right? So we have the abstraction of service. You don't have to worry about anything. All you care about is running your code somewhere that will run reliably when you want it to run. Then you have an event-driven instant scale. What does that mean is rather than you going and polling out to your FTP server to say, do I have a file? Do I have a file? Do I have a file to process? You don't have to do that anymore. What we do is we wait on an event. So as soon as a file gets uploaded onto an FTP server, you get an event back saying, I have a new file uploaded. And then you just kick off your logic app or your function. That means that you only pay for those instances that you actually run against some data. Another example would be if somebody uploads a file on SharePoint, because it's not just stuff on Azure, it can be anything or anywhere. Somebody uploads something on OneDrive, and OneDrive for Business maybe, and you want to know about that, get notified, and then send an email to your admin or whatever, then you can do that as well. So it's totally event-driven. You don't have to actually go and pull whatever resource you want to monitor. And another very important thing is that we don't really work with just Azure stuff. You can have stuff deployed on Azure or AWS or Google Cloud, and then you can monitor your S3 bucket for whatever gets uploaded there and then respond to that event as well. You can have an event kicking off and then feeding that into Slack or Teams or whatever you want to do. So it's totally free. It's totally decoupled from the infrastructure you're running on. And finally, we have microbilling. So the insane thing about when we deployed that application to the finance company was the cost. Because when they asked me how much is it going to cost us to run that, I said, I don't know, man. It's probably going to cost something like £2. Because, what? It's like, well, I said the 400,000 executions, the first 400,000 executions are free, or whatever gigabits that you hit. So it's like a combination of how much RAM and how much CPU you use. So depending on how much you do, then you're going to probably be running for free for all these executions. And we had another customer that came in, and we did the exact same thing for that. In fact, you'll probably see that announced over the next year. So every time you leave a bank from now on and you close your account, every bank will be based on regulations, will be responsible to provide you with 5 years worth of your statements. So you don't have to go back to the bank and say, I think I have an account with you guys 2 years ago and I need my statements. So we're like, yeah, you can send us like £60 in a check, and then we'll send you all the printed statements. No, they will have to make them available to you very easily. So you, with your old account number and maybe some kind of credentials they might provide you, you should be able to go and get them. So we did a proof of concept for another bank that they want to do that, and we only used logic apps, Azure tables, and functions to do the whole thing, and then expose a portal obviously to do that. When they asked about the cost, we said, well, I think this is going to cost you something like £15 a month for all your customers. Like, well, the 18 million customers are like, yes, that's how much it's going to cost you. I mean, technically, the whole thing will probably run about £1,000 a month to maintain everything, with all the scalability and redundancy and so on. So they were totally, blown out of the water when we showed them not only how easy it was to onboard that and make that a reality, but how much it was going to cost them. Because sometimes the cost is not about running things, but it's about not having to maintain these things, like logic apps, which Dave spoke about. They have no code, so technically you don't have bugs. It either works or it doesn't work. You can screw up a key or something, but as long as you have the right credentials there to connect to your FTP server or your OneDrive, that's all you need to know about. It's done. So micro billing, very low cost, event driven, so you don't have to run it yourself all the time. It will respond to events, and you don't have to worry about the infrastructure. Can't get more exciting. As a developer, I'm like, yeah, that's all I need, man. I want somewhere to run my code. Let me just deploy that. DevOps productivity. I used to joke about that early on, saying it's productivity in DevOps because we don't have any DevOps story around functions. But we came a long way. In fact, functions right now are and logic apps as well, are the only resources in terms of serverless they can actually deploy and manage through proper fully DevOps CI environment. So CI/CD, continuous integration and deployment. I can write my code, check it into GitHub, and then push that directly into a repository that gets automatically deployed to Azure Functions. We also added slots, which means they can actually deploy your function into a slot, which is like a pre-prod. Test that to make sure that it's working okay, and then once you're happy, you can show up with a slot with zero downtime. there's a caveat over there as well. I'll talk about you later on, but we have proper DevOps. You can use your tools that you know, like Visual Studio Code or Visual Studio, the full-blown thing to write .NET code, debug it locally as well, which is no other provider has that. You can actually debug your code locally, step by step, find whether you have a bug or something else in your code. So we give you a proper developer story, and once you're happy, you check in your code and you push it into production or whatever environment you want to push in. It focuses about business logic. I did give you two very good examples about businesses taking the idea and actually flying with it within a couple of weeks or months. So the banking statements took about 2 weeks of 2 people doing the whole thing. Obviously, the portal was not polished or anything, but then again, the underlying infrastructure that would serve the data to the customer was there. So all they had to do is just drive that, and actually, we did proper CI/CD on that project. So it probably took like 3 days to set up this CI/CD before we even did any coding. So less than 2 weeks. And the other company that I talked about, they took them 3 months to go full-blown solution behind an API management stuff, and they had a massive infrastructure. Now, it was not only serving that project, but they decided to use that to create a JSON standardized format of their data as they consume them, so they can serve them across the company as well. And faster time to market. It takes literally minutes to deploy an application if you know how to work with code. In fact, even if you don't know how to work with code, because you always start with Logic Apps, that's my go-to tool. You don't have to know about code. You have to say, I want to get responses from my ServiceNow into my VSTS, or I want to get a bug that somebody raised on GitHub and raise it into my internal system, or I want to have from CRM pushing data into whatever. We have over 200 connectors right now, so these are the things that allow you to create an if this and that on an enterprise scale and performance. So what do we have in terms of serverless? Obviously, functions allow you to write code, customized code, and Logic Apps give you a visual designer, like a clickety-click thing that you drag and drop stuff and say, if this happens, then maybe a couple of conditions, do something else. And the way I like to approach that is Logic Apps are my go-to. So if I can do it with a Logic App, I will do it with a Logic App because it requires no code. So no code means no bugs, right? The less code you have, the less maintenance you have. So if you can do everything with Logic Apps, that would be freaking awesome. But there are some limitations there. So let's assume you want to unzip a file. We can handle zip files inside Logic Apps. We don't handle tar gzip. So Linux zipped files are not supported. That's where functions will come in. And the funky stuff about that is that you can actually intermingle them. So you can use Logic Apps as the orchestrator of your functions. So you can have a Logic App calling into a function, then calling into another function, then calling into a Logic App. You can mix and match. So the less code you can write, the better for you guys, right? And then obviously functions do give you developer tooling. Logic Apps also give you a developer tooling. You can develop Logic Apps inside your Visual Studio. There's a designer there that allows you to do that. And in fact, what we did is a trick. We actually brought the portal into your Visual Studio. So when you actually work with Logic Apps inside Visual Studio, you have to be connected to the internet to be able to access that. Otherwise, it doesn't work. So it's a little bit of a trick, but it doesn't really matter because what you get out of that is your CI/CD. You can still check in that JSON code into your GitHub or your VSTS code or whatever you use for your source control, and you still get that kind of visibility on how the changes are taking place. 100 plus, that should be like almost 200 now. And there's a functions orchestration for Logic Apps, which means that you can use ARM templates, which Dave spoke earlier on, to deploy those proper CI/CD again. And functions are also open source. So everything we do for functions is open source as well. You can download it, you can change it, you can run it on your local machines. And in fact, I'll speak about that in a bit. But it's pretty exciting, right? And now we also added Event Grid, which is not showing down here. But these things are running on top of data storage, messaging, gateway connectors, intelligence, bots. And on top of that, you have the ID support. You have your visual debugging history for your Logic Apps, which is also going to be improved. Proper monitoring, local development, and verbose debugging. Some scenarios, even fronting web pages through your functions. You can use them as a glue to do lots of different things. So you can actually automate stuff. One good example was a customer wanted to get an alert every time they were running an Azure backup on their web apps. So they had a web app that would run a backup once a day, and they wanted to know if there was a failure. And I said, yeah, you can do that with Azure Monitor. easy peasy. That was the only thing that was not exposed, like 2 logs from outside the whole of Azure that are not exposed to Azure Monitor, which actually allows you to automate lots of these things. So we said, right, the next step is to write some logic apps and functions that will pull their logs across using PowerShell, and then we'll send an email out. In fact, I forgot that you could use the Office 365 connector to send the email, so I wrote a SendGrid function that would send through SendGrid. It's like, I don't know, think about that. So anyway, there was a solution there. Actually, there were a couple of solutions that the customer could use, but because they had already SendGrid accounts, they were quite happy with that solution. So it's an orchestrator on your infrastructure as well, not just an application solution, right? You can do bots as well. You can do IoT, and that's very important because with IoT, you can have millions of requests coming in, millions of events coming in, and functions will happily scale out to millions of instances to accommodate that. So we do have the infrastructure to actually allow you to do all these things without you having to worry about, ooh, do I need to provision another VM? Do I need to scale out to another instance? Do I need to go to another region, or do I have I run out of capacity? So you pay for as much as you want. Right, let's do our first demo. How many of you have seen Azure Functions in action? A few people. How many of you did it in the portal? So most of you did in the portal. How many of you did it with code, like just plain code? Like 4 people, okay. 5 people, okay. Let me jump into that. So if I jump into the portal now, so we have a specific section here for functions. So I have a resource group, like Dave talked about earlier on, and that resource group contains a function app. Oh, that's interesting. There you go. Thank you, sir. So this is a function app. Now, one important thing to mention about function apps is that we have a cell that is the function app infrastructure that says you're going to be running on an abstracted server. Right now, function app contains no functions whatsoever. But the idea is that you need to deploy a function app, which is almost like a web app in the traditional way. So this is a function app where I can have 1 or more functions. And the functions are the individual pieces of code that you would be executing. So once I provision that, you can choose whatever location you want. I was going with random stuff. Then if you want to create a function, all you have to do is just come here, click on the plus button, and we have a number of templates. We also have a quick start, which is the nice bit there. So the quick start will give you the most common ones, the most common functions that we tend to use. And most of the popular ones are a webhook or a web API that will expose an HTTP endpoint, a timer, which will run on a specific set of intervals using they use cron. Yeah, I was thinking crude, but it didn't come out. And then data processing is connecting to something like Azure Table Storage or Azure Storage Queues or Cosmos DB, and then respond to an event from that. So in this case, I'll go with a webhook, and you can choose the language as well. You'll see we have first full support for F#. The F# people were like, we're like .NET, man, we need to be up there. So it's a first-class citizen now. So the F# people can be happy about the fact that we expose that, but we do give you a lot more languages. So, so rather than using this one, or we can use that one to create a new function. So this one allows you to do this using that. So this is just a basic function. It's a .NET function. You'll notice that we changed here the previous one. The previous format was actually a CSX type of file. Let me see if that creates a CSX file again. So you'll notice here, yeah. So we have 2 different models right now, and this is going to be resolved. But right now we're using the CSX extension, which is a C# scripting language, which was developed by Glenn Block, Script CS. So we took that engine that allows you to run C# as a script and run it anywhere, and we brought it into the portal. So now when you create .NET, we actually compile it on the fly, and we run it for you without you having to debug or compile everything. You don't have to worry about that. So all I have to do now here is just say, I want to run this, and it will just happily go and create my hello Azure. We'll get a little bit of output down here, which is very important. And if I change that to be Glasgow Azure UG and run it again. So you'll notice that I don't have to have any tooling, I don't have to have anything. I can actually go onto the portal and create those functions, and they will be able to run and test. Obviously, you don't get the full debugging experience if you were running on your local machine, but you still have the ability to go from 0 to having a running piece of code within seconds. I don't have to write any code. Now I can go in there and start changing things to make them better for me. So I can run it through here, or I can also get the function URL, which you'll notice that it contains the key. So there's a key there for security, so nobody can call my function even if they know the endpoint unless they have that key. So you need to make sure that you share it accordingly. Then I can spin up a tool to allow you to do that. So if I go here and go into the, that's a bit weird because I don't see that. So V, and then I need to provide a parameter, otherwise it will complain about it. So name, sorry, name equals, because I'm vain, we'll say hello Christos. So there you go. So you don't have to test it through the portal. You can actually have your tools like Fiddler or whatever you want to send REST requests and do that for you. Going back into the portal again, and I'll go into the advanced editor this time. So no, that's the wrong one. I'll close that one down, and I'll go and create a new one. So we can say I want a new function. I think it's right-clicking now. Now, if I go to the not the quick start, but the other one, you'll notice that we have languages. As you can see, we actually are the only provider that offers so many languages, and there are more in the background being worked right now. I can't really disclose these, but you'll notice that we have Batch, Bash, C#, F#, JavaScript, PHP, PowerShell, Python, and TypeScript. So very, very powerful features there. Yep.
PHP is quite an interesting one then. So can developers make basically websites entirely in Azure?
Yeah, like static content. Yeah.
Static content, or sorry.
Well, I mean, you can serve as long as you can render that PHP in the end, whatever you want to put in there.
So I'm not DevOps.
Yep.
So you've got a traditional LAMP stack. So you've got your Linux, Apache, MySQL.
Mm-hmm.
So you're removing most of that. So, but in terms of web serving, so that website you showed us there, is that running from Azure? Is that
so this website is running on Azure and running on top of the Azure functions, right?
So in web technology, so from a web server point of view, is there a background technology like IIS or Apache or Nginx or that sort of stuff? How does that work?
I probably wouldn't use that to serve web content because it's not secured by anything other than your key. So imagine if you get DDoS on your site, there's nothing stopping them for killing your site through millions of requests because it will scale out. So unless you put a hard cap, it will actually scale out to millions of requests just to respond to your DDoS. So you need to front that through Nginx or maybe IIS. Now there are thoughts there about doing some clever stuff with functions around that model, but for me personally, it doesn't really fit that model. We have much better tools on Azure to allow you to run your code, your web app. If you want to run PHP code, then you can use functions for it. Okay. Any other questions at this point? So all these languages, and then we give you a set of triggers that you can choose from. So if you want to have something like API and webhooks, you'll notice that we have languages that support that, and we can have also plain ones plus ones with parameters. So we have a bit of flexibility there. The whole point is to make it a lot more easier for you to onboard into functions. Okay. We also have all of the other things that we might not have time to cover. So one of the things that we have is proxies. So I don't know if you ever used API management or Apigee, where you actually say a request that comes in with a specific URL format, I want to make it a bit nicer. So rather than having that obscure name that I had before, so let me just go back into this one, which you might not care about the name, or you might want to be very careful with the name. So in this case, this one is called, that's the URL there, okay? But maybe you wanted to have your custom domain name that serves that API. So you could create an API. In fact, one of the best examples that you can use function apps right now is to create a totally microservice, I even call it picoservice kind of architecture, where you expose an API to your consumers by exposing an API endpoint at a time. So imagine you're building a product that you want to test the market. in the traditional way, you would download a framework, whatever, whether that's Node, PHP, or .NET. You would create a whole project in a working condition, making sure that it's debugging okay, it's running okay, you've tested it around, and then you have to upload the whole thing somewhere to run, whether that's a web app or an API app or whatever. But you have to deploy the whole thing. And when you have to scale it out, you have to scale out the whole thing again. So imagine you have 10 API endpoints, but you only want to scale out one of them. You can. You have to scale up the whole app. Functions allow you to scale out individual API endpoints because they're individually run, right? So you don't have to worry about 10,000 instances being deployed just for one API endpoint. So you can have nine endpoints that are very quiet. Nobody's using them, but one of them is really get hammered. You have to decouple that from your previous applications, and you write the whole code. In here, you don't have to worry about that. You can create an API. In fact, you can even go a step further and have stub APIs that your teams can work against using proxies that will return stub HTTP responses back. So you can have a whole API sitting there, not really working, but telling to your customers, you can have, this is what we're building. We'll be exposing that. Would you be interested in any of these endpoints or data or whatever? And then you can start focusing on the specific items of the work. So it's a very clever way of doing lots of different things. So one of the things that we have, as I said, is proxies, which allow you to front your endpoints and give it whatever name. And because proxies work in what's my incoming request, what should I be serving, you can actually create a proxy on a specific function app, but serve endpoints from whatever function you have, or a logic app. So you don't have to worry about that. You can create a unified endpoint for your customers, and your code can be all over the place. You don't have to expose all that to your customers. And then we have slots, which I explained earlier on, which allow you to deploy your pre-prod code into a slot, test it in production environment, and then once you're happy, swap the slots around from pre-prod to prod, and have the code there with minimal downtime. There's a caveat that if you have 10,000 instances running in the production slot, which is the default slot, and then you swap your pre-prod slot, we will actually scale down to one instance, which means that if you're actually ingesting event hubs or whatever is coming in your way, those requests will have to wait until we scale up again to the 10,000. And it's a very interesting engineering problem that we have to solve, because we don't want to pre-allocate 10,000 instances for you to pay for it in your pre-prod slot, but we also want to be able to serve that pre-prod slot into production when you are ready. But you can have that pre-prod slot running for 10 days, so we can't really allocate 10,000 slots or 10,000 instances just for that. But we are working on that. And then because it's running on top of web apps, you also get all the goodness of web apps. So things like application settings where you can put your secrets. You can get integration with Key Vault if you wanted to protect these as well. You get App Insights instrumentation, which I actually have here, which I was planning on showcasing to you. So you can get real-time analytics on your functions as they're used without you having to put any effort. You don't have to put any custom logging. You don't have to do anything. You can get all your errors and your executions and everything else through App Insights, like proper web apps. And then you get things like remote debugging as well. You get platform features like Course or SSL, so you can force SSL. I think we're discussing about an engineering issue there, which you can fix with proxies to force people to use SSL only. You can have custom domains, authentication. You can actually proxy everything through Azure AD, so you can force people to authenticate through Easy Auth. Deployment options, continuous integration through GitHub or VSTS or whatever you have without you creating anything. You just say, this is my repo. Every time something gets pushed into the repo, just push it into a slot or production or whatever you want. And advanced tools there for Kudu and so on. Plus a console, you can actually run the same CLI tool that we have up here. You can also have a very similar console here that will open up and you can do all this funky stuff. Right, that's enough there. How much time do we have left?
10 minutes,
Oh, wow, that's a good challenge, right? So demos, serverless lifecycle, design, develop, deploy, monitor. We give you all that fully integrated in the tooling. You can design with whatever tools you want. Portal, command line, or Visual Studio. Nope, let's jump too fast. So what the serverless app design gives you is a stateless and async solution to enable scaling. We actually introduced durable functions, which can be used as an orchestrator as well for your functions. You can have one function that shares state across all your functions. So imagine you have a list of names that you pull from the database and you want to send an email out to them. You can have a durable function that will go and get the data, and then call functions passing the same or the next name in the queue and the next name in the queue. So rather than having to put them into a queue and then pull them from the queue, you can actually use the durable function to orchestrate all that. Now there are pros and cons there on how you do it, but we do give you a stateless and a stateful now solution to your problems. You can connect to with other Azure API services via triggers and bindings. We have all this API abstraction for you. You can use also logic apps to orchestrate workflows. So things like for loops, which I've already explained with durable functions, you can also do with logic apps. So there's not just one way to do things, depending on what you want to achieve. And we have managed connectors that allow you to abstract calls to cloud and on-premise services. Right now we have built-in bindings, but there is a lot of work being done there to expose that API extensibility model to allow you to maybe in the future bring your own bindings in. Now there's again engineering challenges there, because if your code is crappy and you expose it into Azure, then you don't want to bring your whole serverless infrastructure down because your connector is doing silly things. But when it comes to deploying and managing things, we can automate everything through ARM templates. That includes the app functions plus the code, and proper DevOps through safe CI/CD, test and development through slots, and also you can test on the target platform. And you can monitor your apps using App Insights, which I'm going to show you in a little bit. When it comes to triggers and bindings, in the past we had the first iteration of functions, which was built on top of web jobs, was providing a new model of bindings. And now we went back to web jobs because we find that model is a lot more reliable and allows you to do proper unit testing on your functions code. So if whether you create a JavaScript or a C# function, you can actually create a unit test that tests that code in isolation before you even push it into production. So you can be sure that you have proper code coverage when it comes to your deployment. And we're actually extending all these. I will show you how you can do that. And one, two, the HTTP request is the one that comes in, and that's your trigger over here. We have a trigger called HTTP trigger, and then we have the items that are also passed in. So you can have a queue which gets executed. So you can see how the code there is the execution part of it, and then we have also the declarative way of defining these triggers as well. Composition of function, abstraction, and so on. So my next demo is not going to be that. It's going to be, hey. So what I was going to show you is Visual Studio. So in Visual Studio, if you want to create a new project, so let me just go and create a new one. You guys see that? See all the way at the back? Good. So what we want to do here is we actually want to add a new project. And there's I think with Visual Studio latest update, the functions templates are actually built into the Visual Studio template, so you don't have to download an extension. So you can see here we have an Azure Functions under Cloud. So I'm going to create that, called Function App 1. I'm very imaginative with my names. So this one now actually gives you the function app. It hasn't given you any code yet. It says if you want to run stuff, this is what you need to have. So the host one is the one that allows you to override some settings on your environment, like timeouts and memory. And the local settings are the ones that are used to run your application locally. So these settings are not shared with the public cloud, so you can have your local storage accounts maybe or something else to allow you to do your testing. And to add some code in there, I have to add new item. And this is where it brings the Azure Functions templates that we show on the portal. Same experience. So I say an Azure function called function 1. And I will say, what kind of trigger do you want to use? A blob trigger, an HTTP trigger, timer, an SAS token. So I'll go with an HTTP trigger. OK, that. So that will go and create the code for me. And I will set as a startup. So, sorry, apologies, the code is in here. Now, remember how we had a CSX in the portal? In here, we have a CS. So there you go. So it's a CS, not a CSX. And that's very, very important because this makes it testable. This is where you can actually go and create a unit test that can test that class library. It's not an executable, it's a class library that we create for you guys. So this is the code again, very similar to what we created. In fact, it's the exact same template. So if I were to run this one now, it will spin up the core tools behind the scene. So this is what we get installed there. So this is actually a web server. This is what we run on the portal. We have it exactly the same engine running on my local machine, which gives me that continuity we discussed about. And now I can take that URL, put it into the portal again, or whatever I want to use to test. Look at that, it already knows. How clever is my browser? And there you go. So hello, Christos. So again, if I want to debug, I can put a breakpoint there. So just to prove the point, let's put a breakpoint here. Stop that. Oh yeah, it's not gonna do that because I'm testing this function. Duh. It's like, that's a bit weird. And if I kick that off again, and go into the portal, there you go. So proper debugging experience against your functions. Now I've pitched that on a workshop against AWS, so we're testing the same things. We actually did the exact same steps, and it took them twice as much time to onboard into AWS from having nothing installed on their machine. And then when they wanted to test their functions or their lambdas, they had to deploy onto the portal to be able to test that. We give you that full capability here. You can test everything local and then push to the portal. You can deploy on the portal and bring it down here, whatever avenue you want to test. Now, one last thing I want to show you, because we're running out of time, is monitoring. Monitoring is very, very important. So what I've done is I've deployed App Insights, and if you've never seen App Insights before, I would highly recommend we do a session on App Insights because it's freaking awesome. So you can monitor all your web apps. You can monitor all your apps, whether they're running on the cloud or on your local machine or whatever you want them to run. And right now I have this App Insights instance monitoring one server. You'll notice this says one live stream there. So I have one server that runs my functions, which are these ones I had on my other instance here. So let me close that down. So I'm monitoring these functions over here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab one of them. And I have, in here I have my Linux running on my Windows. How awesome is that? And I'm using that to use Apache Bench to benchmark against my Azure functions. Now I'm gonna tether from my phone. So I'm tethering from my phone. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna flood my, my function, sending lots of requests at the same time, just to show you what the analytics will show you. And in fact, if I were able to, because my phone will crash eventually, if I were able to push maybe 1 million requests per second, you will see how in the consumption model of functions, we can actually scale out, and you'll never see that dropped request or whatever. You're never gonna see any errors. So let's put that to a test, right? So I have run that already. So what we're doing here is we use Apache Bench. So for people that might not be able to see down there, let me just bring that up. So we're using Apache Bench to send 1,000 requests at 100 requests at a time against a specific function which I've deployed already. So doing that, it's benchmarking. Let's go back to our live metrics, and you'll start seeing the requests coming down here, where the CPU will start spiking up. Hopefully my phone will last. There you go. So that's the first one coming down there, and you'll also see some scattered requests up here. Let's see, that's running. Oh, did it run already? Maybe it didn't run. Oh, there you go. 100. Oh, no, I don't want that. I don't want that. I want this one. So you can see how it's spiking out there. Now, obviously, it's not even doing anything. It's 100 requests per second, maybe 50% CPU. Once it starts hitting a specific threshold, we'll start scaling out. So technically, you should never see any drop requests. And up here, you can see my request duration, request rate, request failure rate, none. It's not even flinching there with the requests. You know, a couple of spikes and it's done. So there you have it. And in fact, you can monitor multiple functions at the same time. We'll give you a specific filter so you know where they're coming from. So you can monitor your whole infrastructure through that. So just to recap, right? Event-driven, you only pay for what you charge. With Event Grid now as well, that's one important feature there that I haven't had time to cover. Too many things to cover, to be honest, but there was this missing link of logic apps and functions working side by side, responding to events, but we were not able to create custom events. We had to abide to specific things like something that was triggered through a blog post or an HTTP request or something being changed onto things like my OneDrive, my ServiceNow, or whatever. But these were very bound events. Now with EventGrid, what you can do is you can generate events of any type from whatever environment and respond to whatever environment you subscribe to. So you can have millions of subscribers subscribing to a specific event topic. And what's going to be very interesting as you see Azure changing from the reactive model to a reactive extensions model, where we're going to use the same programmatic event to generate events from all your resources on Azure and feed them into the event grid, and then event grid will be able to either automate stuff or respond to things like sending emails or putting things on Slack, and you won't have to do anything with code. It will all be driven for you through connectors and events. So that concludes everything. I mean, we have low cost, very low onboarding, very good developer story, proper enterprise scalability, and live solutions now that our customers are using to leverage everything. I mean, I use logic apps and functions. They're my Swiss Army knife. If I can't do them with that, I'm like, I'm a bit sad. We have to go back to traditional web apps. But it's very exciting, and hopefully we'll see a lot more people taking advantage of that. So thanks very much for attending. Feel free to grab me after the talk for any questions or if you have anything right now. And thanks very much for attending. Thanks, guys.
That was great. Thank you.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Thank you as well for all of you for supporting the event and attending tonight. And thank you to the guys for Hayes for giving us the venue and the food and pizza and beer. So it was great. One last thing, you'll have noticed there was a ticket on each of your seats. Hopefully you've still got it. We have a prize from Red Gate, a free license for their SQL monitoring tool. So number 20. Anyone got that one?
Oh, it's me, and I just said I didn't want it. So I'll let you recall that. It's fine.
You go back to the office now.
Number 3.
If that's on an empty seat, I'm just going to like...
That's you. Yeah, redraw it. I won't use it.
Does that say anything about Red Gate?
Does that say anything about SQL is a good question.
Number 8.
8's sitting here, not used.
There you go.
Sorry.
Can't get it.
You were first.
So thank you again, guys. We're hoping to have another meeting in October, and as Dave said, we're trying to launch one in Edinburgh as well. So keep an eye on our Twitter, sign up for our newsletter, and we'll keep these updated as best we can.
Yeah, any questions, just send us an email. We're literally, I think it's sarah@jug.co.uk and I'm tom.cox, jug.co.uk. So any questions, do send them across.
Cool.
Nice one.
Thank you.